Okay, so I wanted to start with this little quote from Jeff Sutherland, which I quite like. And I think this is really where Holacracy has grown from, because the founder of Holacracy, who we're going to hear from later, Brian Robertson. This is Brian, and this is Tom. They're the two founders of Holacracy One. And Brian actually ran an agile software company and recognized that agile worked exceptionally well for software development, but he actually wanted his whole company to be agile. And so started to work with how could he develop an operating system for the whole organization that would also be agile. And of course, all of the problems that everybody finds with waterfall projects, etc., also get in the way when you're starting to look at how does this work in different departments such as HR, in sales, in all the other aspects of running a whole company, including how does the board behave with that and what are their agile behaviours. And so he designed this whole process by developing it in his own company. So it was an emergent process in itself. He didn't just think it up and project it onto the company. It was an emergent process in developing it. And one of the things that came out quite strongly was that people's behaviour was not controlled by the leader. In fact, what it enabled was a distributive authority throughout the organisation where decisions were made at an appropriate level. Last sprint that you had, Sharon Constantin looked at the board as the radar of the ship, which holds the vision and sets the strategic direction. And detail is what the management do. And in fact, that's exactly the same with Holacracy, because the board is actually still the radar on the ship. The way that Holacracy works is there are units which are complete in their own right, which they call circles, which are also part of the greater whole. So the board actually sits on the edge. The greater whole that it is part of is the world at large, the commercial world at large. So the board is constantly sensing what's going on in the commercial world and setting the strategic direction for the company. From that perspective, it's no different to what to any other company and to what Sharon was describing. However, where it gets slightly different is where you have the general company circle here, which has inside it other circles. So you may have a sales circle in this particular Holacracy, you have a sales circle, you have an operations circle, and a development department. Now I picked out some of the development work that's going on in Ordnance Survey and said, well, within that development circle, you've got solutions engineering going on, and that could be a circle. You've got business systems engineering on, that could be a circle, and geospatial engineering going on, and that could be a circle. The difference is that each of those circles is a self-organising team. So the way that it works is, this area here, which is the organisation's purpose, is actually the pull factor. So whatever the organisation's purpose is where the organisation is going. And at the other side, you're getting stuff done. Now, for those of you that are used to Agile, that will be very, very familiar. The difference is that when you start to get the stuff done, and you start to get the feedback from reality, you start to sense the tensions that are going on. A tension is basically a difference between where am I now and where do I want to be? What's the gap? So it may be that actually, in order to get this next scrum done, we need something that we haven't got, and that would be a tension. We've got to go and find that something that we haven't got. Or it may be the tension is there that we can see that there is a greater opportunity that we're not fulfilling, and that's a tension, and we need to actually to voice that tension and say, okay, how do we bring that in? And that's actually what Brian has been describing in building this whole series. And those, from a tactical perspective, are processed via tactical meetings, which lead to clear work, to projects, to actions, and they get executed. And that, in turn, comes back into, we've got stuff done, and that will lead to, and what next? What's the next tension? Where Agile didn't work, as Brian Robertson was putting this together, didn't work for his larger organisation, was that it was very, very good at small, tight projects, very good at software development. But in terms of then running an organisation as a whole, it didn't allow for changing of the rules if you needed to change the rules. It didn't allow for those things. So he started to bring in some other types of structures as well. So he brought in processed governance meetings, which give a clear structure in terms of distributed authority. So the governance is about the structure, whereas the tactical is about the work, but they're processed in a similar way that distributes the authority down to the right level within the organisation via those circles. So, let's get on to see what Brian has to say about all of this. Let's keep fingers crossed that this is going to work. Okay. So Brian, it's lovely to see you again. Long time since we spoke. Thank you very much for agreeing to help with this Agile Governance Guide development meeting. As I explained to you, the guide is very much aimed at the executive team, and in this particular Scrum session, we are looking very much at the Scrum product owners and how Holacracy will help them, or how it will differ from what they normally do, what effect it will have on the product owners, basically.
Instead of having one intelligence at the top trying to direct and command everything, you end up with everyone using their local intelligence. You're tapping more wisdom from more people,
yeah.
Right? You're allowing more people to use their judgment in their local environment because they know it best, right? And figure out what their needs are and what should flow to them from them. There's a signaling system with prices, but it's much more than just that. There's an emergent order, and we see that in our cities all the time. Yes, we have governments organizing some services, but the vast majority of what happens in a city is not from a top-down directed boss. It's actually in a state of anarchy. It has rules, but no rulers.
Uh-huh.
And I think what Holacracy brings into an organization is a lot of that same power. You have rules, but no rulers. And what that allows is everyone to use their local intelligence within a framework of rules. Just like in our cities, I know not to go steal my neighbor's car to meet my goals. There's boundaries and there's rules to abide by. But within that, I'm free to look at my local environment and adapt and use my knowledge, my wisdom, my experience. And I know what's mine to control and what isn't. And that's the framework of rules. When you bring that within an organization, you get an emergent order that looks a lot more like it does in our cities.
Can you also explain then the relationship between Agile and Holacracy? Because both, for instance, have self-organizing teams. So what is the difference about Holacracy?
Yeah, so just for historical context, Holacracy was developed in its early days in an Agile software development firm. So it kind of grew out of Agile in its fundamental birthing. And actually it grew out of the search for, we did Agile in our software teams, but what do we do in the rest of the company? How do we broaden this and bring the same principles that we were experiencing from Agile to all aspects of our business, including to our Agile process itself? Because you look at something like Scrum, and it's a brilliant method, and every organization is a little bit different. And sometimes there's a need to adapt something to that context. What happens when you want your product owner to do something a little bit different because you happen to be in business X and have some special need? Or you want your developers to focus on something that Scrum doesn't provide because it's unique to your situation. So the irony of most implementations of Scrum or any Agile method is that they themselves are not very agile, right? That there's no easy, systemized way to change the way we do Agile software development. So there's kind of a meta layer there that isn't provided by an Agile method, and that's what Holacracy does. It's not telling you how to run your software team. That's not its job. It's rather telling you how to figure out how to run your software team and how to evolve that to adapt to your local context.
in Scrum the product owner, who normally would make all the business decisions in the Scrum team, and is effectively the final arbiter of all of the requirements. How is Holacracy similar and dissimilar, and how does it affect the product owner as well?
Holacracy doesn't tell you how to organize an agile software team or any team. It just gives you the meta framework for you together to figure out how to do that and to let it evolve as your environment teaches you things. So, we have a software team in my company, and we use at the beginning a pretty canned agile approach, and now we've adapted it because we find in our context, there are certain decisions we don't want the product manager to make. It just doesn't make sense. It doesn't go with their role. We want the freedom to assign somebody else who's better at that to it. So we carve out some decisions and we put it into another role that can be assigned to anyone. There's some things that the product manager does decide. They stay with that role. There's no prescription for that. But what we have now is a system to actually adapt. So when we discover, like, for example, we don't want our product manager to prioritize the order in which bugs get implemented. We have a customer engagement role that's actually really close to our clients. And that role is actually a better fit. They're getting the feedback about what bugs are getting in the way. We want that role to prioritize bugs. Then we can adapt our process and allow that to happen. For us, that made sense. For another environment, that might be a terrible idea. Holacracy doesn't tell you, again, what to do. It just gives you the framework for allowing that evolution to happen, for trying different things, for learning from the results, and for adapting your structure.
Large projects and also small agile projects can both run under Holacracy very easily.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the way I say it. Sometimes people ask me, can we adopt part of Holacracy? It's a big, thing to bite off. And the answer is no. You cannot adopt part of Holacracy, but you can adopt all of Holacracy and part of the company.
Uh-huh.
And the way I say it, it's like, if you just adopted one little rule from Scrum and left the others behind, you don't get Scrum.
Yeah.
At best, you get a micro improvement, but at worst, you actually do harm because Scrum is a whole system that all kind of fits together. And that's the way a lot of large companies start. Our largest case over here in the US is a pretty famous company for us called Zappos, and they didn't start in 1,500 employees, which is their size. They started in a 100-person department, and they adopted all of Holacracy in that department for about 6 months and used that as a pilot to get ready for it, to understand it, to make sure it was right for them. Then they pulled the trigger on spreading it to the 1,500. And that works fine.
Yeah, so it's basically piloting and phasing it in, which is actually what we're currently doing in the Russian company that I'm working with Diedrich in at the moment. And we are starting with a small 100-man team, and then hopefully we will be able to spread it out to the larger organisation later on. Well, we're about out of time, actually, Brian, but that's been extremely useful and extremely helpful to, I'm sure, to all of us as we now start to discuss where we go next with this Agile Governance Guide. So thank you very much. I would like to thank you.
Thank you. Happy to help, and good luck.
Great. Thank you. Okay, thank you. I think we're on to our next piece of the puzzle with a discussion between the two of us now.
Indeed. Thank you very much for your invitation.